Is that coming through okay?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight, and thanks so much to Erica and the Nomadic Network for having me back again tonight. I'm really excited to share more about Bhutan, which is one of my favorite destinations in the world. Sharing a lot of information in terms of kind of best times to go, best things to see, some of my favorite moments. I spent 3 weeks there in November, scouting for the tours I had planned to run this year, but they will be running next year, and have some videos at the end. So all of the imagery that I will share throughout the presentation is imagery that I captured. None of this is stock photography. So this gives you a great idea of what, when someday you do make it to Bhutan. I know it had been on my bucket list for 25 years. So making it there in 2019 was really, really exciting for me. So I'll keep this interactive, and I'm gonna pose some questions throughout, but look forward to questions at the end as well. So let's see. Okay, just as a little background about me. So Epic 7 Travel, I founded this company in 2017. I previously worked in accounting and finance, and then worked in medical device marketing. And after an awe-inspiring, life-changing trip to Antarctica, I decided to chase a dream with regards to travel photography and travel writing. So I've been fortunate to travel to 70 countries on 7 continents, and Bhutan is definitely one of those favorite countries. I'm very conservation focused, and I'll share some things that I'm really impressed by with regards to Bhutan and their conservation focus. And my passions in life are wildlife, landscape, underwater, and aerial photography. And the EPIC in EPIC 7 stands for empowering, propelling, igniting, and connecting with people. So I'm really excited to connect with all of you tonight and to answer any questions that you have about Bhutan. So of the 70 countries I've visited, Bhutan is the most captivating and authentic cultural gem of them all. Many of you may have heard that Bhutan prioritizes gross national happiness over gross national product, which is evident in all of the interactions that you have throughout the country. This image here is one of the dancers at the festivals. I'll talk more about them, but that's certainly, if you can time your visit to Bhutan to coincide with one of the festivals, I highly recommend that, because it will absolutely be a highlight of your visit. So what makes Bhutan so enchanting? So this is another one of the dancers, and he has on for the black hat dance, which is one of my favorite dances to see at the festival. You can see that the outfits are heavily embroidered, and then these beautiful, the headpieces, sometimes they've got masks on, and it's all different. I'll share more about the festivals, but different monks performing these dances. So what makes Bhutan so enchanting? Let's see, I'm not sure why okay, there we go. Extraordinary artistic expression and authentic cultural pride. So these festivals, just by way of background, they're annually put on, and it's based on the lunar calendar. So these are not put on for tourists. People travel far and wide from a variety of villages in order to witness them. So it's really special for you to witness the dancers, but also to witness the locals that are traveling from hundreds of miles from surrounding villages. Pristine, untouched landscapes. I'll touch more upon this, but the Bhutanese constitution mandates that 60% must remain forested. So they've done a wonderful job of protecting their natural resources. And I wish more places around the world would do that. Exquisite hand-woven textiles. So this outfit that he has on is an example of that. And it's, for me, it's a visual and auditory, as well as just the sense. So it's sensory delight throughout the country. And you're constantly hearing the monks chanting, the drums beating, the fluttering of the prayer flags, which is very intoxicating to me. That's probably one of my favorite things to witness in Bhutan. So where is Bhutan located? A lot of people ask me that. So here is just kind of a map to give you an orientation, but it's a tiny Himalayan kingdom, so bordered by China in the north and India in the south. So many people ask, how do I travel to Bhutan? So this is just a view of, so you fly in via Druk Airlines, but this is a view as you're flying in. So how many of you, drop in the chat, how many of you have had the chance to travel to Lukla to do the Annapurna Base Camp trek in Nepal? That's something that I had the opportunity to do in 2004. For those of you who have flown into that airport, you're probably familiar with the fact that that landing can scare the bejesus out of you. Our landing was aborted because there were too many clouds in Nepal, and so they did that landing later. So it's very narrow and it's a very short runway. So this is also a challenging landing, but not nearly as challenging as Lukla. So the international airport in Bhutan is Paro, and it's Royal Bhutan Airlines or Druk Air that flies in. You can arrive, you can depart via Bangkok, Delhi, Singapore, or Kathmandu. I personally prefer Bangkok. There are the most number of flights from there. There's daily flights from there. So that's my recommendation. It is one of the most challenging landings in the world. Interestingly, only 17 pilots are qualified to land because they're coming in, they circle down, and there's this beautiful flute music playing that you'll hear in my videos, but as you're landing. So it just becomes this majestic landing. They're landing very early in the morning. You leave Bangkok at 5 a.m. So you're landing here at 7 a.m. with just beautiful light caressing the mountains as you come in. So pro tip for any of you that go, make sure to request a left-hand side window seat departing from Bangkok. So that's how you get these views, and then you'll have the Himalayas as you're flying in as well. So the best time to visit. So September to November has the clearest skies, so you get the best Himalayan views at that time. And it also coincides with a lot of the festivals. The second best time to visit is March and April. Also, so that's the other time of a lot of festivals. So March and April, so either the spring or the fall. You really want to avoid June to August. That is rainy season or monsoon season. And for those of you that have trekked before, I've had the misfortune while I was on the Annapurna Base Camp of getting a leech on me. So I now try to avoid trekking in rainy season, if at all possible, because I never want one of those bloodsuckers on me. Again, I ended up screeching and having to call down to my guide and come up and remove that thing that had fallen off my leg and was moving across the room. So that's why I would, and there can also be, there's a lot of rain typically, obviously during monsoon season, but that can lead to landslides. You get cheaper prices, but that's something to be aware of in that June to August timeframe. So here, just in terms of the imagery that you're seeing, is a black hat dancer down here in the bottom left, one of the spinning black hat dancers. So I love to do a lot of long exposure photography. And then this is from the Druk Path trek. So I'll talk more about trekking, because you can do a combination of doing both cultural tour plus trekking, or do one or the other. If you can, and you've traveled all the way there, and you have the interest in doing it, I would highly recommend doing both. So the cost to visit Bhutan, it is one of the more expensive destinations. So at a minimum, you'll pay during low season. So I had mentioned that's monsoon season is $200 a day. And then high season, it's $250 a day. And depending on if there's upgrades and accommodations, other add-on activities, that will drive the price higher. But know that that's the minimum daily tariff that is charged for each visitor who is visiting Bhutan. However, something to be aware of is that daily tariff includes your accommodation, your food, your driver, your guide, and your entrance fee. And the great thing that I really like that Bhutan does is that $65 of this daily fee, so 65 of the 200, or 65 of the 250 per day, funds free healthcare and education through high school for all children, which is wonderful. Independent travel is not permitted. So pretty much anywhere else in the world, you can book a ticket in and then rent a car or travel via public transportation. You cannot do that within Bhutan. It is required that you are with a guide at all times, which I think adds so much more for you to be able to learn. It's such a culturally rich country. To me, having a very knowledgeable guide makes the experience that much more meaningful, and you'll have access and an understanding of things that you wouldn't otherwise. But that's just something to be aware of, that it's not, you can't book that ticket. The tickets have to even be booked through your tour operator. And there's also a visa fee, so it's a $40 one-time fee. That gets issued electronically by your tour operator, so you don't do it upon landing because you've got to have this authorization and everything has to be booked in advance prior to you getting there. So that's shown before boarding your flight to Paro. So departing from Bangkok, you'll show them that electronic visa before you board your Druk Air flight. And so the moniker for Bhutan tourism is high value, low impact tourism. Bhutan only has 700,000 residents, and so they want to ensure that they're maintaining the culture and doing a lot, obviously, in terms of healthcare, education, and maintaining all of the sites that you see around the country. There's a lot of 7th century temples, and the wonderful thing is, unlike many places, sadly, that I've experienced throughout the world, you're not seeing trash on the side of the roads. You're not seeing plastic bags and bottles, and they do a great job. And I do think it is because there isn't independent travel. I'm now pretty much everywhere I go, sadly, even on the beaches in San Francisco, there's trash and litter everywhere. And so they're very mindful of that, but I think having it more, limiting the number of tourists that come in, and it is a more controlled visit, if you will, it decreases that, which is a bonus as well. So one of the things I'm really, really excited by is Bhutan is the only carbon negative country in the world. And drop in the chat if you were aware of that. That was a new learning for me as I was planning. This shot is one of the views that you get on the Druk Path trek. So it's beautifully layered, and you get these trees here. You tend to get those at the higher altitudes. So just some beautifully, and because I was trekking in November, this is what I mean by having those clear skies. In March and April, this is more likely to be obscured by clouds. And also sometimes they have to shift the trekking route sometimes at that time because there may still be snow. So also something to be aware of depending on the time of year that you're trekking. As I mentioned before, Bhutan's constitution mandates 60% of the forest must remain intact and undeveloped. So I think it's a little hard to see in these images, but on these hillsides behind, those are all covered in trees. So it's beautiful as you're flying in to see the trees, and then as you're driving all of these kind of circuitous routes through the mountains and kind of the mist, but it's just trees everywhere, which is absolutely magical to witness and something that you don't see in many parts of the world because so much is sadly being deforested. And so Bhutan's done a great job of maintaining their forests. So interesting Bhutan facts. The currency is the ngultrum. So $1 US is 74 ngultrum. Something to be aware of, prior to entering Bhutan, you will have paid for most everything in advance, so you don't need a lot of cash. I'll share at the end some of kind of the souvenirs that you can buy. So one of the things, kind of a tip I would recommend if you are visiting, you get the best exchange rate. I think this is probably typical in a lot of countries, but with $100 bills. So just make sure to bring clean, unmarked $100 bills in order to exchange those so that you can buy souvenirs. And if you need that for tipping or other things, but most everything else I had mentioned, and alcohol, you're typically paying for that on your own. If you needed to buy a SIM card, you're paying for that on your own, but you don't need a ton of cash because most everything is paid for in advance. The language is Dzongkha. But a vast majority of the people that you will interact with do speak English. But as anywhere, I think learning any of the phrases is always helpful and appreciated. And certainly if someone does not speak English, the guide is always great. So I had these wonderful interactions with yak herders on my Druk Path trek. And so he was translating all of that. And so I spent a lot of time with the yak herders, just getting to know them and their families and learn more about their way of life. And so my guide was instrumental in all of those conversations. So their famous cuisine is imidachi. And just drop in the chat if you are a fan of spicy food. So I personally love spicy food. It does not love my stomach anymore. So be aware that this imadashi, depending on the number of chilies they put in it, can be very, very hot. So if you are sensitive, just be aware of that in terms of your consumption. Each place that we went to, I always tried it, but I would just put a little bit on to determine, okay, is this a 1 to 10 on the hotness scale? But I highly encourage you to try it because it's highly addictive. The national sport is archery. The national dress, so go for men and kira for women. So this regal gentleman here in front of the Punaka Zong, he has a go on. So it's similar to a kimono. In this front part here, there's a pouch there that most people will be storing things in. And then the kira, I think I've got a shot later on, but just beautifully embroidered. Interestingly, for weddings, those goes and kiras could take a year to make, made from silk, and they're beautifully embroidered. But I really reveled at all the clothing and the workmanship that you see throughout. So this zong behind, we'll talk a bit more about that. But the zongs and all of the architecture throughout Bhutan is really, really striking. So that's what I mean by it's just a visual feast from within every level within the culture. So the population, only 700,000 people. So I live here in San Francisco, and that's basically what our population is, but that's the entire country. So pretty sparsely populated. And everyone in Bhutan that I had the privilege of interacting with, just wonderful, and learned so much. And you will do the same if you have the opportunity to visit. So how long should you spend? So I recommend staying at least 12 days. Many people, the vast majority of people that visit for 5 days. And so they visit Paro and Thimphu, which are the two. So Paro is where you land, and Thimphu is the capital city. But by extending, it allows you to see Umtang, Trongsa, Phopjika, and Punakha. And just here, down here at the bottom, so the lower left-hand picture, that is the Punakha Zong in Punakha, which is just beautiful. And that's the Zong that the gentleman with the go in the earlier picture is standing in front of. Here in the middle, that's Phopjika. So it is, I'm currently addicted. So I don't know, for those of you that are aware, in San Francisco, our summertime is our coldest time. And it tends to be very foggy. But for those of us that love long exposure photography, it's a lot of fun to go photograph the fog. So I'm tired, as I've been out most of the past, a lot of the past week photographing. But Phopjika has some of it reminds me, it doesn't have the same rolling fog, but it's this beautiful mystical fog that rolls through the valleys in the morning. So it's really pretty to photograph. And then you can see the beautiful architecture. And I'll touch upon too that in the fall timeframe, you have the opportunity to see the black-necked cranes that come down from Tibet, which is pretty cool. And then on the right-hand side, that is also in Punakha, and that's the view. It's a valley view from the Kamsung Yuli temple that you can hike up to. So that's beautiful with all the layers as well. So in terms of how you should spend your time, so day one is Paro, where you land. So Kichu Lakong is a 7th century temple. So these prayer wheels, which I absolutely love, and love to spin them and kind of get that motion blur. That's what's in the upper right-hand corner. And the second picture is a ringpung or Paro Zong. So as you can see, there's beautiful in terms of the windows and the doorways and the way that they're carved and painted. They're just exquisitely done. And so it's jaw-dropping everywhere you look, all different compositions. It's beautiful as the monks are passing through these courtyards. And interestingly, drop in the chat if you've seen the movie Little Buddha, but parts of Little Buddha were filmed at Rinpung Paro Zong. So if you do visit, be on the lookout because you'll see some scenes there. So a really fun fact, so all zongs, so zongs are former fortresses, but they're built without nails or iron bars. So when you see that these exquisite, and they're typically perched on a very high location for defensive purposes, but there's no nails used. It's just the way everything's been fit together, and there aren't kind of these iron support bars throughout. So I just found that fascinating, particularly because most of the things that you're viewing are anywhere from the 7th century to the 15th century. And some of those you'll notice are being restored, but it makes it all that much more exquisite to me that no nails are used. So the other thing you should definitely try to do, so I mentioned archery as the national sport. So that's me trying archery. It's been the national sport since 1971. It looks much easier than it is. So I probably spent the first hour with just my bow limply falling off the front of, or my arrow limply falling off the bow. And so my ground operator, Sungay, who is in the picture with me, he's a national champion for archery. So he found my failures highly amusing. So he and my guide Gaurav were shooting, because the targets are at a much greater distance that I never hit. So they made it look very simple, but I highly encourage you to try it. It is a lot of fun, but it'll give you an appreciation for when you see the archery competitions, which are very prevalent throughout the country, after you've had a chance to try it, to then watch them hitting these bullseyes at a very long distance will give you a much greater appreciation for it. So day 2 to 5, Bhutan. So Paro is in the west and Bhutan is in central Bhutan. So there are monasteries. So this is Kinchusum Lakang is a favorite of mine, just beautiful with this gold detailing, and the prayer wheels are always prevalent and typically flanking the monasteries. A village visit, if you can arrange that, highly recommend it. Beautiful weaving, so down here in the bottom right. So weaving is typically done with yatra, yak's wool, or with silk, and it's just exquisite watching them make that. And you can buy kiras or gos, or you can buy wall hangings or sweaters. So that's something great to bring back and try to leave some room in your bag. And then this here, it gives you, it's because of the shallow depth of field I used, you can't necessarily see it really well. But so these clowns, if you will, they're called atsaras. They are at all of the festivals. And so they go around and they're entertaining the audience throughout. But the cultural dancers, so the female cultural dancers in the background, you can see them, they have the kiras on. So that's the national dress that I mentioned. And then, so the festivals we've touched upon, definitely include that as part of your visit if you can. So when going to Bhutan, if you can, I highly recommend flying one way and returning overland to save time. So you'll get the beautiful views as you're flying, but then you're not repeating it by driving both ways. So day 6, you want to spend in Trongsa. This is my favorite zong. I'm not sure if Rick Gazarian is on tonight, but if so, thank you to Rick. He's the person who recommended I make sure I see Trongsa, and I'm so happy that he did, because it is a beautiful, beautiful zong. It has all of these different elements. So this is Trongsa zong with the cherry blossoms. So there's winter cherry blossoms. I'm used to seeing them here in the Northern Hemisphere in April, the spring cherry blossoms. So I was delighted to see them in November. This is my guide Gaurav going through that cantilevered bridge that you enter to get into Trongsa zong. There's numerous courtyards, and you can get perspectives where you're looking down, so you can get the beautiful red monk robes flowing as they walk through the courtyards. Prayer wheels, of course, and this particular zong has naughty monkeys. So be on the lookout for your stuff. They do seem to always be plotting what they can grab. I made the mistake of leaving my tripod there, and then all of a sudden looked over and one was scoping out my stuff. So be aware of if you leave bags, tripods, etc. So pro tip for this. It's a very windy road, particularly getting to Trongsa. So make sure you have a motion sickness remedy. So my go-to is the relief band. I'll touch upon this later in the presentation. And for those of you, or no, I didn't touch upon it in my sustainable travel, but I do have a blog post about motion sickness remedies, but this is my absolute go-to. So you just put this on your wrist, you can set it to 2 or 3, and you don't get the drowsiness from Dramamine or Bonine, but it's something that you'll use on, if you're prone to motion sickness at all. The roads throughout Bhutan are very windy because they've been cut into the mountainsides. So I highly recommend having something for that. So day 7 and 8, Pobchika. So this is where I mentioned that you can see the black-necked cranes from November to February. They do tend to stay at a distance. We got very lucky that they were pretty close to us when we were there. My guide mentioned that's the closest he'd seen them in 25 years. But to get a really close shot of them, you typically need a 600 millimeter lens, which I don't recommend bringing unless you're a very serious birder because there's some weight restrictions on the flights. But just know that you can see and hear them. And there is also a crane information center where Karma, there's a crane that's been injured, is being cared for. So you can see one of the cranes up close there, which is really cool. These prayer flags, so this top image in the upper right, these are called manidars. And so this is the first time I'd seen this type of prayer flag. Many of you are probably familiar with the colored prayer flags that are square in shape that are often at high passes. So these white ones also have mantras on them, and as they're flapping and fluttering in the wind, that is sending those prayers to the heavens. And so I was just enthralled by these and loved photographing them. But it was my first time seeing these vertical prayer flags, and they dot the Bhutanese landscape wherever you are. And then the Gangti Monastery, that's this lower left image, that just gives you a close-up shot of the detail, the carving, the colors that you'll see within the monasteries. And then this is that same valley that I had mentioned in Pobchika that is magical at both sunrise and sunset with the fog snaking and meandering its way through. Pro tip for here, do the nature hike starting below the Gangti Monastery. It's only about 2 hours. It's not a strenuous hike at all, but it's a beautiful way to just immerse more in the culture in the area. So day 9 and 10, Punakha. So Punakha Zong, that's the one that I had shared in the upper right. That's a night shot of it. And then the beautiful, the regal gentleman in front of the Punakha Zong. Chimi Lakang. So for me, as I was researching, I kept seeing pictures of phallic symbols, and I thought, what is this? So Chimi Lakang is known as the Temple of the Divine Madman. So many people come to this particular temple for fertility blessings. So while you're en route to this temple, because the phallic symbols have, it is meant to be good luck, or it can represent fertility blessings. So you'll see that throughout the village on the way to get there. And it's also a great place to do some souvenir shopping. I'll show some of that at the end of some of the things that you could buy if we have time. And then Kamsung Yuli is also, so that's that snaking river that goes through the valley. That's also in the Punakha area. So pro tip, we touched upon the souvenir shopping. So day 11, Thimphu via Doche La Pass. So Doche La Pass, up here in the upper right-hand corner, there are 108 stupas, and this is to represent soldiers who lost their lives in a fight with Indian insurgents I'm blanking on the year right now, sorry, but this is beautiful at sunrise. And so you will pass through that on your way to Thimphu. When you get to Thimphu, visiting a handmade paper factory, so this is the second image, is beautiful to see from kind of the start, how they're soaking the bark and then processing it to then create this handmade paper. The great thing is there is a gift shop at after you go through the paper factory, so you can buy gift cards, you can buy notebooks, beautiful paintings, so certainly save some room for that. They've got some beautiful products. The farmer's market is really fun whether you're into photography or not. It's really fun to visit, sample the wares, see everybody interacting. I certainly, anytime I travel somewhere, love to go to farmers markets. The arts and crafts school is wonderful. So you can see people painting tamkas, you can see weaving. So there's a variety of activities that you can see at the arts and crafts school. And then this Buddha Dordenma is beautiful, and it has so again, this is a beautiful place for sunrise and sunset, but it has 125,000 miniature Buddhas inside its chest, which I found pretty fascinating. And then an archery competition. Thimphu tends to be a great place to see it, and that's where I witnessed it. So a pro tip, if you do want to visit the arts and crafts school, it is closed on the weekends, so make sure to schedule your time during the week. So how many of you have seen, raise your hand or drop it in the chat, but have seen pictures of tiger's nest before? So that's what's here. And that's the most famous icon from Bhutan. I highly recommend doing this on your last day if you can in Bhutan. So Tiger's Nest is known as Takshing, but by doing it on the last day, you are better acclimatized. So it's a 5 to 6 hour round trip hike to get up there. There are 700 stairs and it's located at 10,000 feet. So Paro itself is at 7,000. So you're only doing a 3,000 foot ascent. But if you're coming from sea level, as most of us are, and are not acclimatized to the altitude, just giving yourself a couple days makes it easier. But I can assure you, I think there's various pictures that you might see of certain icons around the world that you're like, wow, that's really cool in pictures, but is it as impressive in person? And Tiger's Nest absolutely is. I marvel at the way that it's kind of precariously perched in on the side of the mountain edge. One thing to be aware of is you cannot bring cameras inside camera bags, trekking poles, so you'll leave all of that outside in a locker before you head in. So you can take pictures all the way up, but then you have to store everything when you arrive. Highly recommend doing a hot stone bath after this. So at the end of that day, it's great to relieve your sore muscles. So the hot stone baths, for those of you that are not familiar, takes a variety of forms depending on where you have it. But I did mine. It was in kind of a wooden bath, and on the other side of that they're dropping these hot stones in that then release minerals into the water, and so it's very much like sitting in a very hot tub, and then you can let them know if you want them to drop more in. But a very cool Bhutanese experience. So on day 13 you'll fly home. This gives you an idea of those spectacular Himalayan views that you'll see. Be aware that the flights can often be delayed due to clouds and fog, etc. So make sure, I highly recommend you overnight in your transit city. So I recommend going via Bangkok, but my flight was delayed by a couple hours leaving. So you don't want your international connection going back home to be butting up against that, because there's a possibility you might miss that flight. So on the way back, request a window seat on the right-hand side so that you get the best views. So trekking, so what I've just touched upon, that is if you are doing a cultural tour. As I mentioned, if you can add on a trek, I highly recommend doing that. So full disclosure, I've trekked to Annapurna Base Camp and Everest Base Camp, and those are tea house treks. But I would not by any means consider myself a camper, though I am going camping in Yellowstone in September. But the other time I most recently camped was in Iceland, and I had called my photo workshop leader and I said, hey, I have no idea how to put up a tent. I'm pretty sure it's going to collapse on me and suffocate me in the night. Are you going to show me how to do this? So I felt myself more proficient after Iceland, but I'm not somebody who typically goes in and backcountry camps. So if you're like me, you can rest assured Bhutan trekking is what I would refer to as valet camping. You carry only your day pack. Your support team, so the support team is you have a guide, a waiter, a horseman, and then your chef. And then the horses carry all of the tents, the food, your duffel bag. So the only thing that you're carrying is your day pack. And when you roll into camp, your tent's already set up. Your stuff is inside the tent. A dining tent is set up as well as a toilet tent. They deliver a warm water bowl to your tent both AM and PM for you to wash up. There's you have a hot breakfast in the morning while the team breaks down the camp. And the waiter brings a hot lunch in tiffins, which is wonderful. So they pick out a beautiful scenic spot, and that's where you're having lunch. So this shot, the bottom shot is where I had lunch on day 3. So I'm like, not a bad view, right? In the middle shot, that was my campsite for the first night. So beautiful monastery. I got to see them milking the yak babies the next morning. And then up above, you can get some great night photography. So that is my tent, and you've got no light in the sky, which is really, really nice. You have a 3-course dinner. They provide a hot water bottle to keep you warm at night. And as I mentioned, there's a dining tent and toilet tent. One thing to be aware, there's no electricity available. So you want to bring one of those brick chargers to charge your phone, and bring plenty of batteries for your camera if you're a photographer. So I had 4 batteries with me. Temperatures, you're looking at 14 degrees Fahrenheit, -5 Celsius to 63. So during the day, it was similar temperatures to San Francisco for trekking. Does get colder at night. So just something to be aware of. But if you've got, I tend to get cold in San Francisco. I have a down jacket on most of the time. And so I was wearing long underwear to bed at night and then another pair of pants and a fleece over that. And I might have a hat on. But with, they provide your sleeping bag, the mattress, or they actually encourage you to bring your own sleeping bag, but they can provide that. But they provide the mattress pad as well as your trekking poles. So with that, you stay very warm. I was comfortable and slept like a baby the entire time. So the Drunk Path Trek, that I highly recommend, as there are some longer ones. I think I'm planning to go back and do the Snowman Trek, which is purported to be the hardest trek in the world in 2023. And that's a 30-day trek. I don't recommend attempting that one out of the gate. So the Drunk Path Trek is a great one, which is 5 days, 4 nights. You trek 6 to 9 miles a day, 10 to 15 kilometers. The altitudes range from 11 to 14,000 feet. There's a good chance in the fall of interacting with the yak herders because they're coming down from the higher elevations to the lower elevations. And suitable for people carrying a day pack and photo gear over uneven terrain for up to 8 hours at altitude. In general, I was typically rolling into the camps within 4 or 5 hours, but certainly if you're lingering or just want to take more time on the trek, expect to do up to 8 hours, depending on kind of what your speed is. And in terms of training, I would recommend 1 to 2 days of aerobic exercise, hill walking or stair climbing 3 to 4 times a week for 3 months leading up to the trek. I tend to travel with a lot of photo equipment, so my stuff with tripod weighs out at 25 pounds. So I was doing 10-mile hikes every weekend for 3 months leading up with that on my back, just to make sure I was prepared. And I did it with no problem, but most people are not traveling with that amount of weight on them. I overpacked my bag just to make sure I could do it with extra weight. And in terms of the images that you're seeing here, so that's one of the baby yaks that they had milked in the morning. And then this layered view that you see, this is coming out of, so this is starting day 3, the beautiful layers that you see. And then you've got these stupas that will appear at the various passes, not appear, but they've been constructed there. And then you've got the prayer flags surrounding them. So beautiful scenes. And this was my lunch spot on day 5. So another beautiful view for lunch. So packing tips. A lot of people are always asking me what it is that you want to bring. So it's really important within the monasteries and temples, you must have long pants and shirts, as your knees and shoulders must be covered for both men and women. So just pack accordingly for that. For shoes, for the temples, you take your shoes off anytime that you're going in. So make sure you have on easy slip-on, slip-off shoes. I had trekking boots with me as well, but if you're just visiting the temples that day, I typically travel with hiking boots as well as all-birds that are easy to slip on and off. Noise canceling headphones, there do tend to be a lot of dogs, sadly kind of stray dogs, but they tend to be well taken care of for the most part, that people feed them or monks are feeding them or they're getting scraps, but they do tend to bark at night. So if you've got noise canceling headphones or even just earbuds to block the noise, highly recommend that. And then layers are key because the temperatures can swing for the early mornings and late evenings. Kind of your typical down jacket, gloves, long underwear, and rain gear in case it rains. I didn't have any rain for the 3 weeks that I was there in November, but if you're there in the spring or the summer, it's highly likely you may encounter rain. So just making sure you've got those layers. Just in terms of these images, this is day 4 on the trek, the upper image. This was a sunrise image, that middle one. And then this is a dorji within this was an exception that was made in a place that I was able to photograph. Typically, you cannot photograph inside if you're inside one of the temples. So you can photograph within the courtyards of the zongs and outside, but once you go inside one of the religious areas, you're not allowed to photograph. So this was with special permission in this area that I was able to photograph. If you do have 2 camera bodies, highly recommend that you bring them just to maximize flexibility. So throughout the trip, I was set up with both wide angle and zoom lenses, but certainly not required. And I captured a ton on my phone as well. So favorite travel products for Bhutan, I touched upon the relief band. A Nalgene water bottle is great. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. I just use the water, what do you call it? I'm having a mind blank, but heating up the water in the room and then filled my Nalgene bottle. Again, they're really great that they have signs throughout the country to minimize plastic water bottle use. And so this way, by you heating up the water, you're not having to purchase any water bottles throughout the country. Noon for rehydration. This is I'm drinking one today, but this is great, particularly because at altitude, you do tend to get more dehydrated. So I drank one of those a day to keep headaches at bay. Camp suds. So I tend to travel really light and travel with 3 pairs of pants and 3 shirts. I prioritize photo equipment. And so this allowed me to just wash, and all of my quick dry stuff, I'd hang it in the room and then that would dry overnight. So the camp suds are great to be able to do laundry in your room. Solid shampoo and conditioner. I love both Lush and Ethique. And then Bite toothpaste bits. These are another favorite thing of mine. Again, decreasing plastic, then you're not having to use plastic toothpaste. So 7 reasons. So I am, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm bringing guests with me in 2021. I had planned to bring guests this year, and this is assuming borders are open, it's safe, assuming there's a vaccine. So I'll caveat with that. But assuming all of those things take place, I will have an intimate group with 8 guests. Unparalleled access to exceptional and unique experiences. All the locations and activities have been handpicked and scouted by me, as well as to optimize for time of day, light, and exclusivity. As I mentioned, the festivals are really special. So I'm diversifying and attending 2 festivals and I've secured special behind the scene access to that, as well as a number of other experiences that you're not having on the typical tours. So that'll be really exciting for any guests that join. Also, we'll be sharing tips to elevate your visual storytelling. So as I mentioned, there's 700,000 residents in Bhutan, but only 250,000 tourists visit each year. So you can be amongst that group. And for my tours, all costs are included, entrance fees as well as gratuity, and then the airfare from Bangkok to Paro. And to get more information on those, just see tours and workshops at epic7travel.com. We were having an issue with my website today, so just be aware that what's showing there right now are the 2020 dates and pricing, but it'll be updated tomorrow with the 2021 dates. But for anybody who might be interested, my cultural tour will be running October 19th to November 1st, and my direct path tour October 30th to November 7th. One of the special benefits of coming with me, the guide that is accompanying us is Gaurav. So he's a VIP. He's the most experienced guide in the country, our most senior guide. So he's led both Anthony Bourdain. If you've seen Parts Unknown, he's appeared in that with Anthony Bourdain, as well as Demi Moore. And as a result of that, we have a lot of behind the scenes access. So customized tours with only 6 to 8 guests. It's a 14-day cultural tour with 2 festivals. And then the Druk Path is an 8-day with 5 days of trekking and valet camping, as I had mentioned. So just a couple, because I know that this will be a consideration for everyone. Obviously, the landscape for our travels will be very different from what we were accustomed to. So for my guests, I have a 20-passenger bus. So as I mentioned, it'll be a maximum of 8 guests. Everyone has a window seat, plenty of room to spread out, and room for photo gear. On the treks, it's a single tent for all trekkers. Single supplement available if you don't want to share a hotel room on the cultural tour. Chef and the waiter are trained in hygienic food preparation, and my group size is 6 to 8 versus 12 to 15 for most group tours. So that's the reason we're kind of afforded some of this better access as well, because it's such a small group. I also, if anybody happens to be in the Bay Area, offer 1-day photography workshops. I haven't been doing that with COVID right now, but I am developing an online version coming soon in case anybody might be interested. And then we'll have other future tours. So sign up for my newsletter or email me if you'd like more information about those. And you can follow me on Epic 7 Travel across all social media. And Erica, it looks like I'm 5 minutes out. Do you want me to show one of the videos, or should we open up for questions and then see if we have time for the videos?
You can show one of the videos.
Okay. So I will show the cultural tour. Is that showing okay, Erica?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Wow. Incredible, Marielena. Incredible. Yeah, you can stop sharing your screen so we can see you. Oh my goodness. I can't even believe it. For one, chock full of information and those photos and that video, I'm like, I'm there. I need to get to Bhutan. We had, I feel like, a record number of questions. And we have a lot of accolades coming through right now. Just stunning. The video looks stunning. Everyone is very excited about this presentation. Just, I don't know if you can see the chat, so wanted to let you know that.
I can see the chat now. I couldn't see anybody's faces or the chat throughout, but I can see it now.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to run through some of the questions. I know that we're already at 9 o'clock. So, you know, if you have something to do or somewhere to go, it's okay. You can leave. But if you want to stay and hear some questions be answered, like I know a lot of you guys had questions. So I'm going to go ahead and say them. And so whoever can stay on, please do. So Emily was asking, who and when do you pay the $200 to $250 fee to?
Yep. So that's a great question. So you will pay that to your tour operator in advance. Typically, you'll be paying that 90 to 120 days. For my groups, you're typically paying 120 days out because it is high season. So those flights coming in from Bangkok to Paro do tend to fill up. So last year as I was flying in, he reached out early July and said, we need to get these booked. So kind of depends, but you are paying everything typically 3 to 4 months in advance, depending on your operator.
That makes sense. I also wanted to, just before we go back into the questions, I just want to say thank you to everyone, just in case a bunch of people hop off. Thank you for coming tonight. And also, I just wanted to let you know that Marielena is doing this completely for free out of the goodness of her heart because she's passionate about Bhutan and she's so excited. So I really highly encourage you to follow her on Instagram. Her photos are insane. Her website is so informative. So if you could jump on her newsletter list, that would be incredible. And just like support, you know, what she's doing, which is bringing the beauty of the world to us through our phones right now. So even if you can't make her Bhutan trip, I would definitely stay in contact with Marielena because she has a wealth of information with so many things, especially sustainable travel and travel to all these continents. Like incredible. I just wanted to say that before we continue. Okay, Alyssa was asking if there's a single supplement fee for just like if you were to go for $250 a day. She heard of some $40 fee, so it's actually $290. Is that true?
That is, yes. And I should revise that for future presentations. But yes, if you are a single traveler, that 250 then has an additional $40 single supplement added on.
Interesting. Okay, great. Daniel was asking, is there a maximum amount of tourists at one time? Like, could you be denied your dates because there's too many people booked?
No, so I haven't heard of that that happening, and I know that the government, and as I've been in contact with my operator and guide, I'm in pretty close communication with them. They're always just looking at ways of improving that experience. I think it's already probably one of the most immersive and wonderful experiences I've ever had anywhere in the world, but they're very mindful of that. So certainly I think there are some parts of the world that have really gotten overrun. So in the future, I could anticipate that perhaps that does get limited, and who's to say post-COVID, if they're trying to kind of limit the number of people because they've had very little transmission. There was one American at the beginning of COVID, treated him very well. He ended up being air flighted home on a special plane, but they've had very few. There's just a couple instances where maybe people were working in India and have come back in, but they're quarantining people separately, but their borders, similar to the rest of the world, have been closed, and they're keeping kind of a close eye on that. But I think it still kind of remains to be seen, I think, for most of the world, what post-COVID might look like with those restrictions. But to date, I haven't heard of anything like that. Right. Your issue, though, can be if, like when my operator reached out and he was like, hey, these flights are filling, because you absolutely need to be on that flight to be on your tour. So making sure that you're booking that with enough time.
Okay, good to know. So like in terms of government and denying visas, it's really worked out through your travel agent.
Exactly. Yep. So your agent arranges everything with regards to the visa. So once you've kind of set the dates and these are the dates that you want to come, they will take care of the visa and send that to you electronically. So you're not having to go to any Bhutanese embassy or send your passport away here in the US or wherever you may live. They will just email that electronic visa to you, and then you're presenting. Make sure that you do have, that was something I should have explicitly stated that, but make sure you have a printed copy of it to show for your when you're departing from Bangkok or whichever airport you choose.
Interesting. And then when we're talking about just traveling outside of a group and that $200, $250, $290, how much do you spend outside of that? Because I know you were there for 3 weeks. So on extras, how much do you spend outside of that?
So I tend to tip very generously, as I think we all should. People are giving us a great service and sharing their culture with us. So kind of depends how you tip. Make sure to bring enough money for tips. I would say at a minimum, $10 a day for a guide and $5 a day for your driver. So just make sure you've budgeted that and you bring that in cash to present to them. And you could do that in US dollars, but I think I personally try to tip that in local currency if I can. But the Neil trim, as I mentioned, is 70, it's $1 US to 74. So that can be a large chunk of cash. So I ended up tipping at the end in US dollars because I had so much cash on me because I was there for 3 weeks and wasn't sure exactly what I'd be spending on. But I didn't have a lot of expenditures outside of that and souvenirs. I'll show a couple things just to give you an idea of some of the things that you can buy. but these are little mini goes that are like wine covers. So I brought these back as all kinds of like hostess and holiday gifts. So friends have loved these. Those are beautiful. These were made at one of the nunneries. Beautiful little bracelets. This is one with an old coin that was made. This one I was able to pay via credit card, but vast majority of things, if you're buying souvenirs, you're paying in cash. If you're buying one of the Tonkas, or if you're buying a Cure or Go, there may be credit card capabilities there. And this is a really cool, I love, I know Sharon, who's on, loves textiles. So this is just kind of a fun embroidered bag. So things like that. So make sure to bring money for souvenirs. You also, your entrance fees and things are included, but typically, so the entrance fee into the monastery, but you're often giving a donation at the temple of a small amount. So having kind of small change for that. But beyond that, and then alcohol, you're paying cash for, or SIM cards, things like that. But those are the main things you would need cash for. Most everything else is covered in that daily tariff fee, which is wonderful.
And if we're talking about souvenirs and alcohol, like how much is that? Is that sort of regular price, like $5
so a lot of these
things?
things, so these you could buy for $5, $10. My friend bought like a yak bell, and that's $5, $10. So a lot of the things I would say, I want to say these are a few dollars. I can't remember, but most of the things are pretty normal prices. When you get into some of the jewelry, that may be a bit more expensive. But yeah, most of it is pretty normal pricing. So I would assume Tonkas and things like that, you could be looking at $150 to $500. And let me just quickly show you, for those of you that may not be familiar with what a Tonka is. And so these can be hand painted or embroidered, but these are beautiful, and it's nice that they roll up and you can get them back. But one of my other pro tips, if you can, is to just come with extra room in your bag. I was very tight on room, so I learned my lesson. And when I return next year, we'll have much more room in my bag to bring stuff home.
Perfect. We also had a good question from Daniel that just popped up. How do you find a visa agent? I know a lot of our community like usually just Google stuff and books online. Is that what you do for Bhutan too?
Yeah, so there are, if you just Google, because there's a variety, because your visa agent will be the same as the tour operator that you use. So going on to TripAdvisor, other things like that in terms of operators that you can use, highly recommend that. And by Googling, different companies will come up, but then they'll handle everything kind of soup to nuts for you. So they'll handle the visa. They're going to handle that international flight from Bangkok to Paro, and that so that flight you'll pay for separately, and then or you'll pay the operator for, I should say, you're going to pay for that in advance. And then if you take the flight from Paro to Bhutan, that's a separate charge. So any of your flights are not included in that $250 daily charge.
And how much did you pay for your flight? Do you remember, from Bangkok to Bhutan?
So typically those flights range, because Druk Air does have kind of a monopoly on that market. Those flights can be, on average, I would say around $1,000.
Round trip?
Round trip, yeah.
Okay.
So it's round trip, and then your internal flights might be $250, $300. But that's kind of, and it's dependent upon the exchange rate, but that gives you kind of a general idea. So you'll want to add that on top of your daily fare. And that's something that it is a pretty steep price tag, because many of us might be paying, like from the US, I can sometimes get to Bangkok for $700, $1,000. And then to go from Bangkok to Bhutan, which is a 3-hour flight, you're adding another $1,000 on. So you're like, oh, but to me, it was absolutely worth doing that. Highly recommend it, but just be aware that is an expensive flight because of kind of the monopoly in very few airlines.
And in cases like this, we just extend our trip so we can amortize the cost of the flight. Okay, we had some questions about, like, especially Catalina, who is a very free spirit. I don't know if you're still on, but she's asking, like, what if you don't want to do something that day? What if you want to change your plans? Can you like hike without a tour guide? Can you change your plan day to day? Or does that all have to be booked right before you get into Bhutan?
So that's a great question, Catalina. So you can't hike. So anytime that you are out, if you're visiting the monasteries, if you're hiking, all of that needs to be done with a guide. So there's no kind of independent, but there is flexibility. We'd be chatting with Garab and I'd say, oh, we saw this or I've read about this. Can we add this in? So there's certainly flexibility. They want to make sure that you're having the best trip possible. But kind of flexibility within reason. If you're in Bhutan and then say, well, I want to be back in Paro tomorrow, that's like a 15-hour drive. So that a 12, 15-hour drive, kind of depending on what those roads look like. But within the area that you're in, if you say, oh, well, I was thinking I wanted to go to this monastery, but can we go to this one instead? Or could we do this village visit, or maybe mix up the days? Because for the festivals, typically the festivals go on for a few days. So if you're in that area and you want to go to the festival on day 1 versus day 3, you can do that. It's not a specific entry time of you must come to the festival between 9 and 12, if that makes sense. So it's certainly more because you're kind of defining how long you'll be there and where you're going before you get there. But once you're there, there's definitely flexibility to say, well, I'd like to go to this song or monastery or do something different.
That's great. Also, there was a big question about accommodations. What kind of accommodations are you allowed to book? Are there homestays? Is it just hotels? Are they like hotels or are they like homestays?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So they do a wonderful job in Bhutan with the accommodations. So the accommodation is, so within that $250 daily tariff, or $200 during low season, that is 3-star accommodation, which is very, very nice. If you want to upgrade to 4-star, I don't know if anybody wants to stay at like Six Senses or Amankorra or Gangti, those types of places. That's going to involve a higher premium. So things like that, or other experiences that you do. There, you can also do homestays as well, which is a wonderful experience. Something I would recommend checking is, so some of those homestays just have a room or 2. Some of them have 5 or 6. So it depends on, I've kind of learned for myself over the years, I don't like sharing bathrooms anymore. So that's something that is kind of a no-go for me. So I prefer to just have my own bathroom. So many of the homestays you might be sharing a bathroom, but doing that for a night or 2, I think is totally fine. But some of them do have private bathrooms within the room. It just depends on the homestay. So if that's something that is important to you to have your own bathroom and you do want to do the homestay, because you can often do a cooking class there, and it's a great way to interact with the locals and see their home and see how they're living, the different levels of the home. It's, there's differing experiences. So in terms of size and then private bathroom or not. So just inquire with your agent about that.
And then I don't know if you said this, but this is sort of on my mind. Let's say you don't go with a tour group, like Epic 7 Travel. Let's say you go on your own. Are you getting your own guide, or are you? Oh, okay.
Yes. So that $250 includes the guide. So it's your guide and your driver and all of the entrance fees. So that, and it's wonderful because you're getting this very personalized attention, which is great. And all of the guides within Bhutan are going through guide training school. Of course, there's different levels of experience. So as I mentioned, I've got the most senior guide in the country, or one of the most senior guides in the country. And then there may be some who are newer guides, but all of them, anybody that I heard as I was listening to people, the guides kind of share with their guests are very knowledgeable.
Interesting. Then that brings me to, David was asking, is tourism the primary industry in Bhutan?
Yes. And so it is one of the primary industries. There is agriculture. There's some exporting of cordyceps, which some of you might be familiar with. The yak herders are the ones who are farming that at higher levels. It's one of the highest prices for a kilo. It went for 42,000 US, which is crazy to me. So that's one of their big export industries. Of course, there's kind of middlemen, and that's not necessarily going to all the yak herders directly into their pocket, but tourism is one of the major industries within Bhutan.
Wow. Okay. And then Kendall was asking, why are there so many prayer flags in mountainous areas? Do you know?
So that's a great question. You typically see them in mountainous areas and at the high passes because that's where you have that wind traveling through, and then that is sending kind of those mantras, those blessings up to the heavens.
Interesting.
And so it can be good luck. A lot of times those white prayer flags might be seen in front of a home right after somebody has passed away. That's to honor someone. A lot of times at the high mountain passes, which I'm sure what a lot of people have seen are those square, colorful prayer flags. And it's more on, I saw the white prayer flags more in some of like flatter areas or in front of homes. But those are the ones that I became just kind of obsessed with while I was there.
Wonderful. And then talking about high places, Mark was asking about altitude sickness. What do people do or what do you recommend for altitude sickness?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I was meeting, particularly for my tours, I met with a travel medicine doctor, and so there's a variety of things. So the first thing is most people so for Paro, many people don't tend to get altitude sickness. It tends to be kind of a low enough elevation because at Paro in the valley, you're at around 7,000 feet. But if you're ascending too quickly, because the general rule is you want to sleep lower than the highest point you've ascended to. So some people might use Diamox. I don't tend to get impacted by altitude. The person who was with me does get impacted by it. She never needed to use Diamox because you're typically, so Paro is high and then Bhutan, I believe, is a little higher. But you can use Diamox. Staying well hydrated is really important. But there wasn't an instance when I was there. When I was in Cusco, one of the people traveling with me got very bad altitude sickness. So we had to get them down to a lower elevation, but you're not as high of an elevation. So staying hydrated, certainly if you're not feeling well, letting your guide know. For the trekking that I'm doing, because that takes you to a higher elevation, you're looking at 11,000 to 13,000 feet. For that, my support team, if somebody needed to be helicoptered out, that is an option, but it is why there's mandatory evacuation insurance. There's also an extra, for trekking, there's always kind of an extra pony or horse to take someone out if they're injured or have altitude sickness. But in general, unless you're doing one of the treks, it's probably unlikely. And even with the treks, your ascent is much slower. It does tend to, like, Everest is a higher altitude, Kilimanjaro is a higher altitude. And typically for Kilimanjaro, sometimes with Everest, people are going up too fast. The way in which these ascents are done tends to be slower. That snowman trek that I was mentioning is purported to be one of the hardest treks in the world. That one, fewer people have finished a snowman trek than have summited Everest. I think it's 300 total. And it's because there are, I believe it's 16,000 foot passes. So a lot of people have to turn back due to weather because it's a 30-day trek emotionally. Some people are just like, I can't do this, or altitude sickness. But you're dealing with much higher passes. But for a general Bhutan tour, if you're doing the cultural tour, it's probably less of an issue. Trekking, you want to kind of talk to them about the altitudes.
Wow. Whew. 30-day trekking. 300 people. That's insane.
Yeah, and I didn't think I had any shot of doing it. My support team talked me into doing it because one of them had done it 5 times and one of them 3 times. And they were like, you're rolling into these camps in 3 hours when this is supposed to be a 5 or 6 hour trek. And I was really sick. I got not altitude sickness, but I had just picked up a cold. And so they were like, well, if you can do this sick, we think you could do snowman. So now I'm seriously considering doing it. We'll see.
You'll have to report back to us. Talking about treks, Jen was asking how many people are typically in a trekking group?
So that's a great question. It can range. So I've heard 12 to 16. For any of you that have trekked before, I prefer the smaller groups, which is why I'm keeping my group smaller. And mine has a guide at the front and a sweep guide at the back, because you may have somebody who is really fast and you don't want the people at the back to feel pressured to go faster. And so that way it stays safe, because the thing about the trekking in Bhutan, there are not markers that say turn left here, turn right here. My guide, I was just like, how did you even know to turn here? They obviously know what that terrain is and what the path is. But those trekking groups can differ in size. I know that the Planet D, who many of you are probably familiar with, they spent some time in Bhutan, and I know the trek that they did had 16 people on it, which they thought was a bit much. I think that's large for a trekking group. I've tended to do mainly solo treks, but that can vary. But I would guess for a lot of things you're looking at, it kind of just depends on, and if you're going and paying the $250 a day, you can kind of define what your group is. But if you're going in on so like Mountain Travel SOBAC, National Geographic, most of theirs are 12 to 16 people.
Okay. Wow. And then how much is the trek? Because you said that wasn't part of the included price, is it?
So that's also falls under the daily tariff.
Oh, okay.
So whether you do a trek or the cultural tour, it's a $250 during high season, $200 during low season.
So nice. You just like know what you're going to spend before you go. You've already spent the money. It's almost like a free vacation once you get there. It's like 3 months ago, Erica paid for that.
You kind of forget about it. And you're like, oh, great. But it is nice because once you're there, you're not having to really think about it at all.
Right.
And I tended, for the person who asked about altitude sickness as well, just avoiding alcohol your first couple days is really good. And also, if you happen to take, I had forgotten to mention this, but if you happen to take Ambien or anything to help with sleep, it's best not to take that for the first couple days while you're adjusting. So that was something that was new that I had just learned.
Cool. Daniel has so many questions. Daniel, if you don't go to Bhutan, I'm going to be so sad. Daniel is asking if you're willing to share accommodations. Is it still $200 or $250 a day?
Yes. So that is the price per person per day, regardless of, and that $250 a day is assuming that you're doing a twin share accommodation. I mean, they're not going to place you with another stranger, but whether you have the room to yourself or you're sharing with someone, it's still $250 a day. And if you are, to somebody's earlier question, if you are there as just a solo traveler, you're looking at a $40 premium. I actually think that, I believe it might be 40 if you're there as a solo person and 30 if you're there with 2 people. I think. I could be wrong on that.
What do you mean, if there's 3 of you traveling?
No, so if there's 2 people, I think there's still a premium associated with that. You're paying $250 plus $30 extra a day, so it's $280.
Okay. Interesting. And then Daniel's also asking about insurance. Is it travel insurance included, or is that something you need to? Okay.
So great question, Daniel. So you do want to purchase that separately. And I would recommend for anyone, I totally forgot to mention this. I do have a blog post that kind of supplements a lot of what I covered in the presentation, because I won't be sending the presentation out, but my blog post covers most of this information. I would highly recommend, particularly when you're in any remote destinations, but for my tours, I'm requiring a minimum of $500,000 in evacuation insurance. I don't know if any of you have ever had to be evacuated, but it can be a harrowing situation, and you could be looking at a $50,000 price tag to bring something in and then get you out. So you just want to make sure you're fully covered for that. So whenever I go to very remote destinations, I make sure that I have a minimum of $500,000 of evacuation.
Oh my goodness.
Which is, for most travel insurance, a lot of times that's what it might say 100,000 or 500,000, but that tends to be pretty standard. But you don't want to just get 50,000 because it is a remote destination.
Okay. I believe I just found your blog post. Is it the 12-day Bhutan itinerary?
Yes.
Okay, I just linked it. Danielle, I believe you can't share accommodation with a stranger. So yeah, it's still going to be $200. If you're going alone, you're going to be spending $290.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And so that is and then there was one last question, sort of out of order, but David was wondering if there's a minimum or a maximum number of days you can spend in Bhutan.
So that's a great question, David. There is not a minimum or maximum. I certainly, just given that you're paying $1,000 just to fly there, and to Erica's earlier point about kind of amortizing it a little bit, I think probably 5 days is the minimum that you want to spend. And I think that's kind of the average that most spend. And then you get to see Paro and Thimphu, and maybe you can get to Punakha. But for me, that had been my thinking as well, and why my cultural tour is 14 days, because it gives you enough time without kind of rushing. And while I was scouting, I had 15, 18-hour days, which is not what my tour groups will be doing, but I wanted to experience everything, visit every monastery, temple, village, have all the different experiences to determine, okay, what are the best experiences for people to have? What's the best time to visit this place to avoid crowds, lighting, etc.? What are the best vantage points? But I think having more time, and to Catalina's earlier question, that gives you a little more flexibility too, to say, like, we came across this beautiful, we didn't expect it. We had stopped at one of these places along the way, and we happened to be there for a major religious holiday. And so there was this other religious ceremony going on. And so we sat and did that for 3 hours, but we thought that was going to be a 10-minute stop along the way. And so that gives you the flexibility to be able to fully immerse in experiences like that.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. I mean, for so few tourists to get your own guide, or to, always be guided, whether it's your own guide or not, is really incredible, because I feel like there's a lot of places that are like relatively untouched that just feel like so hard to travel to. And so this is really a nice way to do it. And honestly, like, just over tourism is not pretty. So
No,
it's really nice that they're thinking about this.
The king and just the government that's in place, I, as you said, I'm very appreciative of how thoughtful they've been in terms of the impact to the environment, how mindful they are around conservation, and really staying true to this high value, low impact tourism, and sticking to that.
Right. Nomadic Matt always says, I'm going to totally mess it up. It's like penny wise, but pound foolish. Like, don't just not go to expensive places because you don't want to pay for it. Like, really just, pick how you want to spend your money. And that's also like budget travel, right? So even though this sounds like it could be one of the expensive trips, like, it looks worth it. And so, yeah.
It was one of the reasons I had
Emily is agreeing.
When I was in, so I did China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia for 3 months in 2002, and then Tibet, Nepal, and somewhere else. Oh, Myanmar in 2004. But I was on a really, really limited budget. And so I was like, I can't do the $250 a day. But now that I think about it, I'm like, well, the fact that you're getting accommodation, guide, food, driver, I'm like, this is actually a really good deal for all that is included, and so much of the thinking being taken out of it, but really getting this immersive and potentially private experience.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. Any other burning questions? I really want to shout out some people. Like, Daniel loved all your questions. I loved everyone participating in the chats. I feel like so many people were asking such great questions. Sajad, I don't know if I'm saying your name right, but you were really valuable in answering some of the questions, so I didn't even have to ask Marielena, so thank you so much. And there's a ton of thank yous in here, Marielena, so you definitely have to save this chat.
And I'm adding my email in, because I didn't, while I was answering questions, and I couldn't see the chat at all while I was presenting. Right. So if you have sent me private messages, I've seen them scrolling past, but I haven't touched upon them in the presentation, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to answer any of those questions that we may have missed, because it's been a very active chat, which is wonderful.
It's true. Yeah, Marielena will answer anything, and I highly suggest, like I said, connecting with her. Epic 7 Travel is, at the very least, just wanderlust filled to follow and information filled. She really does her research, and she has some incredible posts And yeah, I highly suggest this. This is, you know, one of those travel accounts that are a learn from me travel account, and it's just very inspiring. So I want to say thank you, because this is the second time that you've presented to our community, and I'm so just grateful that you came. I'm also so grateful we had over almost 90 people on this call, which is incredible because, you know, Bhutan, it doesn't get a lot of airtime. And so I'm just really glad that you were able to, you know, share, educate, and I'm sure inspire some people to travel to a place that's very, you know, talked about very little. I